Howdy, y'all. This is a review of the land administration system of the Republic of Colombia. My name is Alex Fonts, and here we go. So here's an outline of my presentation here. I'm going to talk about an overview of the country, then I'm going to give a little bit of a history of Colombia. Then we're going to talk about the current state of the economy and the population, which is very important and affects this whole system. Then we're going to talk about the current land administration system that is in place in Colombia. We're going to talk about the registration process and a lot of the main issues with this system. Then we're going to talk about what should be done moving forward and talk about some improvement suggestions that I have to assist this system. The Republic of Colombia is in South America, bordered by Venezuela, Brazil, Peru, Ecuador, and then it's got coastal areas along the Pacific Ocean and the Caribbean Sea. So let's talk about the history of Colombia. The area that is now Colombia has been inhabited since about 10,500 BC, so very long time. There's been multiple regimes in the past 400 to 500 years, mainly Spain and European influences, along with indigenous peoples of South America. And Colombia gained its recognition as the Republic of Colombia in 1886 after its independence from Spain. Since the 1960s, the country has experienced non-stop armed conflicts that have included groups and issues as the Armed Forces of Colombia, which are military groups that represent the government, different political revolutions that are consistently happening throughout the country, large and small, drug trade and drug trafficking issues, which is a huge influence in the land tenure problems that the country has, and then left-wing guerrilla groups and right-wing paramilitary hired militias and their influences. Remember that part, the fightings and the many different influences are going to be a huge problem and part in this land administration review. Talking about the population and the actual land of Colombia, Colombia is the third largest oil producing country in South America. Agriculture makes up about 25% of the population's employment, and there's a huge gap between the urban employment and urban population and the industry centers, and the capital of Colombia and the rural population. So huge diversity between the two. Colombia has an estimated population of 48 million people. 60% of them are indigenous people, 15% are Afro-Colombian descent, 20% white, and 5% mixed American Indian descent. And then it's considered by the World Factbook a mega diverse country. So I guess not all countries are given this specification, but Colombia was given this specification. Colombia has about 1 million square kilometers in area. That's a very silly way to put it. 55% of the country is densely forested by the Amazon forest. Less than 1% of the population owns over 62% of the best agricultural land or rural land in general in the country. So that is very unfortunate for most of the lower class. About 30% of the population is rural, and about 2/3 of the population lives below this poverty line. So that's a big issue in the country. The country is divided into 32 departments. or divisions, with one capital district of Bogota, which is located right there. Basically, the Washington, D.C. Of Colombia. Okay, so let's talk about issues that are currently facing Colombia. Corruption in the government, consistent fighting, IDPs, and registration cadastral legitimacy issues, or we're about to talk about. So first, corruption in the government. So there are multiple influential groups and powers throughout the country that have all infiltrated the government of Colombia and have been causing corruption issues throughout the government since the 60s, if not longer. Bribery is an issue, drug trade influence is an issue, and I found this interesting quote from the CIA World Factbook that the Colombian government has stepped up efforts to reassert government control throughout the country and now has a presence in every one of its administrative departments. So I found that kind of humorous that they're basically boasting that the government of Colombia finally has presence in its own government. So I found that kind of humorous that this issue is such a big problem that that was a notable, I guess, point in the government's history. Okay, and so like I said earlier, remember all those different groups that were fighting over power and land and the political disputes and the multiple groups that were fighting throughout the country. This has created a huge land dispute and land disparity problem throughout the country. Millions and millions of citizens have been displaced across the country, especially the rural population that gets in the way of this fighting and drug trafficking and drug trade. These disputes usually basically unroot huge groups of populations to get up and leave and become internally displaced persons. And the government, really can't intervene in a lot of this because of the corruption that exists throughout the government. And so these displaced populations kind of pop up all over the country, usually right in the outskirts of urban settlements, creating these huge informal social areas that the country has recognized, as populations of their citizens, but they really can't do anything about that. And so this internally displaced persons population, IDPs, has grown to about 4 million people. So it's a huge issue that the country really hasn't been able to do much with. So this current land administration system, it is decentralized among the multiple departments, the 32 different departments that make up Colombia and the capital, and the portions that make up the land administration system is a cadaster, which is housed by the administrative cadastral office, and the registration process is housed by the registry office and the Chamber of Commerce. So basically what this is telling you is that the registration process is not held together. It is broken up, and it is housed by tons, or these multiple groups throughout the country, which does not lead to a smooth process that's good for the citizens. Only about 30% of Colombian parcels are properly registered and placed in this confusing cadastral system. Most of these parcels are in urban areas and in industrial towns. The large landowners of Colombia have huge influence in this process, and they've been properly registered. But again, the fact that they have an incomplete / broken system means that not many citizens have access to this paper-based system. The only portion of the country that seems to be properly registered is the main capital of Bogota, and they have a proper registry and cadastral system, but it is, if you were to use the word prototype, that would be the best term to describe what is in Bogota. And it is based on a university, the University of Bogota. It basically runs this system. And so the capital is well represented, but that is pretty much it throughout the country. So continuing on, talking about the land administration system, going back to talking about the IDPs, is, now that we're talking about this registration system, what do you do with this huge population? Do you take the time and energy and to move them back to their previous land? Do you grant them land rights and assistance where they can currently reside, sometimes on private, sometimes on public property? What do you do with these populations? This population is made up mostly of minorities, women, headed households, and basically just uneducated population that the government really does not know how to assist. And another problem that faces this IDP population is, they don't know what to do either. They do not have an education on the simple registration system that the country currently has. They just are not sure where to go, and low education rate throughout this population. Another problem that faces the lower income groups is the very weak and almost inhumane land tenure laws that exist throughout the country. So the absentee laws of the country allows those who have been on land and not been removed within 30 days in an urban environment or 15 days within a rural environment can apply for registration for that property. So another big issue that you're seeing is people are being either forcefully kicked off the land or killed for their land rights. And the fact that the country allows for, or the government of Colombia allows for, this almost inhumane way of obtaining land, it suggests basically poor, I don't want to say poor responsibility, but almost a poor responsibility of the country that it's not protecting its citizens by this creation of this law. So the current land registration process, for those that do participate in this process, in this system, takes about 2 to 3 weeks, costs about 2 to 3 weeks of average working wage, but as we discussed earlier, over 2/3 of the population is below this wage, so that adds up to the lower you get in this poor population. The registration cadastral system, like we said, is broken up into multiple parts. There's a yearly census completed for tax and census purposes on the cadastre, and that's used to populate that system. But again, it's usually only in urban areas. It's been successful in the capital, and it's only for legally recognized settlements. So these illegal and rural populations that have been removed from their homes and those that are too low of an income to register their settlements or their land are not included in the census. So again, go over the main problems we just talked about. The IDP situation, what do? Do they stay? Do they go back to where they used to lived, before they were displaced. How do we register them? Are we going to register them? Um, where should they be registered? Um, and how? And so that's a big problem. The corruption in the government is a huge problem. Uh, the fact that the whole system is separated into multiple parts in multiple locations, that is a problem. The internal struggles for power throughout the government. Uh, the fact that the agricultural land is owned by a small percentage of the population is not being used for the best um, of the land's abilities is a problem. 30% of properties are registered properly, so that means only 30% of the real estate throughout the country is properly taxed and benefiting this system. And another main problem is that 2/3 of the population is poorly educated and is middle to lower class. So, how do we fix this? So, improvement recommendations are that they combine the registration and cadastre system. Basically, it would be really beneficial if they could move from a paper-based to a computer-based system so that it could grow throughout the country instead of being based in the um, main industrial towns or in the capital. Um, it would be good if they could take and move the registration system to all 32 municipalities, so as to allow access for all citizens, help educate the government employees, uh, you know, by taking and educating more of the government and those represented in the registration system. um, I believe that would be best for the government's influence. Um, and I think another great idea would be to use Bogota, the capital, as an example. If it's working for the capital, I believe they should follow after the system that they have set in place. Um, it would be great if they could strengthen these adverse possession abandonment laws so that citizens aren't tempted to dispute/kill over land because of the weak abandonment laws that the country has set in place. And large landowners need to make sure that they are utilizing the agricultural lands that they have to the best of the country's needs. And then also by assisting minorities and allowing them to have an influence in this process because they are such a huge portion of the population that's been displaced. And so if this administration project were to be picked up by the World Bank and a $50 million assistance loan was made, my suggestions would be that $5 million would be put towards assisting with the relocation of the masses of internally displaced persons. $10 million would be put towards land administration professionals to work with the government of Colombia and help educate them about how their system could work and what would be the next steps moving forward. $5 million towards a combination of the cadastral and registration system. I think by creating one streamlined system, the country would be better off. I would put $12.5 million towards the digitizing of maps and computerizing, putting the system on a computer system or a computer database. $7.5 million towards surveying and mapping all the urban areas, and then reaching out towards the rural lands, especially the large landowners and the masses of the small landowning farming community, and registering their land. $12.5 million towards the creation and implementation of this system throughout the country in all the 32 of the municipalities or districts, and the capital, and then another 7.5 million, or the last 7.5 million, towards education and extra personnel funding, so that they could have the manpower to back up this system and ensure that the influence is there to properly implement it. And benefits that could come from a project would be help with the overwhelming IDPs issue, mirror the benefits seen in the capital Bogota across the whole country, utilize the agricultural potential that the country has yet to exploit, create a strong administrative presence in a corrupted government, employ hundreds, if not thousands, of citizens, and increase the profit that can be made from a system that works. And so all these benefits could definitely be seen by a land administrative project. It just definitely needs the attention and manpower to put it in motion. And so here is my works cited. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation, and I hope you all have a great rest of the day.